His Excellency, Mr. Yoweri Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda, His Excellency, Mr. Armando Guebuza, President of the Republic of Mozambique, Her Excellency, Madam Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency, Mr. Wani Iga, Vice President of the Republic of South Sudan, Honorable Ministers, Ambassador Maged Abdelaziz, Under-Secretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, United Nations, Amir Dossal, Global Partnerships Forum Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you here today on behalf of Africa Investor to our Heads of State Investment Dialogue. Africa Investor as an institution has dedicated itself to promoting and intermediating capital to African investment opportunities through our growing domestic and global investment partnerships. Excellencies, this morning we've heard from African capital market leaders and pension funds who have been informing global investors about Africa's investment climate and very specific opportunities. The goal has been to look at the critical issues which are focused on intra-African investment, mobilizing domestic sovereign and pension fund capital, infrastructure investment, and innovative platforms to engage diaspora capital in support of capital market investment opportunities. Africa's domestic international capital base is set for important growth. Africa's 6 largest pension funds by asset size will nearly triple to $622 billion by 2020, from $260 billion in 2010, and by 2050, this could balloon, we understand, to $7.3 trillion, an important source of domestic capital for the continent's growth, you will agree. These assets alone are greater than any aid Africa has received over the last 10 years or can expect over the next decade. This summit, in partnership with UN OSA and the Global Partnerships Forum, launched a process in 2005, which culminated in 2011 in this very room with the African Union present and supportive to launch the AI Heads of State Investment Advisory Council as a forum for investors to research and lend advice and practical steps to the African Union, heads of state, and investors to ensure that we can collectively take steps to increase capital flows to the continent. Excellencies, leaders, investment leaders convened here today in this room have a very clear and defined interest aligned to working with Africa Investor in partnership with the African Union to support our mutual aims to increase capital flows across our continent. Pursuant to this, Africa Investor has researched and affirms that intra-African trade is a very critical issue, sitting at around 12 to 15%. But intra-African investment is sitting at 5%, with a projected annual compound growth rate of 25 to 30% over the next 10 years. By contrast, intra-European investment in 2010 was sitting at 82%. So we therefore like to work together to ensure that the continent can set a target over the next 10 years in that 60% region. We think that's completely possible. Madam Chairperson, to achieve this, we're calling for an investment pact. We're calling for a call to action between us with the African Union to pursue this goal where we prioritize and pursue a stated 10-year intra-African investment growth target. We believe the consequences of this initiative will go a long way towards raising the continent's investment profile, where domestic capital will act as a catalyst to attract and retain global capital. Excellencies, we applaud your commitment to engage the investment community in support of the continent's economic transformation, and we stand ready to partner with you on this journey. I'd now like to call on our friend and partner, Ambassador Abdelaziz, to give some opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Mr. Danzo, for this nice introduction. Honorable Heads of State and Government, Excellencies Ministers, Madam Chairperson of the African Union Commission, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to warmly welcome you at this African Heads of State and Government Investment Working Lunch. highlighting the close partnership between the United Nations, the international private sector, and the African continent. We are honored by the participation of the distinguished African leaders and global business community to discuss investment opportunities and priorities in Africa. I wish to thank Africa Investor, the Global Partnership Forum, and the New York Stock Exchange Euronext for continuing support and growing this high-level event every year since 2005. Honorable Presidents, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our continent is fast becoming an attractive economic destination and investment frontier. Today, the continent is really on a sustainable rise, offering the world's most promising growth potential, with estimated growth rate of 4.3% for 2013 and 5.3% in 2014 on average. Africa made efforts to overcome its challenges with great success, including diminished conflicts, increased stability and security, sound macroeconomic policies and market-friendly reforms, and strong progress with respect to democracy and good governance. In the 2012 Doing Business report, the World Bank noted that Africa has 5 countries among the top 10 reformists in the world. But despite these enormous progresses, we still don't see a matching increase in investments in Africa. In 2012, Africa received only 5.6% of the global FDI inflows, and that is something that has to change. Against this background, there are still some wrong perceptions that investment in Africa means taking high risk. And while this perception is changing, it is doing so at an unfortunately slow pace and can be reversed at any given time, and for measures that for reasons that could be beyond any African state. An unfortunate event like the ongoing terrorist attack in Nairobi, for example, can reverse the hard-won gains in terms of image and attractiveness for investors, even though it is being committed by an outlawed group, that Al-Shabaab. We should not, as investors, allow this to deter us from going into Kenya or into any other country that is subject for this kind of incident. Let me seize this opportunity to extend my condolences and sympathy to the government of Kenya and to the families of the victims, and assure the Kenyan people and its government of the United Nations support. Excellencies, while the continent is still struggling with its image, the lack of infrastructure remains a real obstacle to foreign investors. That was said by His Excellency President Museveni just 10 minutes ago in another meeting. Africa still suffers from a poor access to reliable energy, high transport costs, and inadequate human skills. Another hurdle for investors is the level of corruption, which is still perceived as rampant throughout the continent. Overcoming all these challenges will be critical for improving investment attractiveness of the continent and ultimately unleashing Africa's growth potential. African leaders are fast-tracking the establishment of a continental free trade area and are planning to adopt a Pan-African investment code that will address the problems of market fragmentation and promote regional integration and inter-African trade, thus attracting both domestic and foreign investments. African governments, however, cannot realize the continent's potential without the productive partnership with the private sector, civil society, donor community, and international organizations to drive the growth and development agenda. The UN highly values the catalyst role of investment for Africa, sustainable and inclusive growth, and is going to take that into our planning for the post-2015 development agenda and our implementation of the outcome document of the summit of Rio +20. As Africa rises, full of hope and possibilities, it is imperative that the continent wins its image battle and tells its own success story, rebranding itself and demystifying stereotypes and heading into a much more solid relations with the investors to achieve the transformative agenda that Africa deserves. And no one will be more qualified to do so than our presidential panel and supported by the chair of the African Union Commission, and we eagerly look forward to their presentation. Now I invite my dear friend, Mr. Amir Dussal, the chair of the Global Partnership Forum, to moderate the presidential panel.
Thank you, Ambassador Magid Abdulaziz. It is such an honor to be working with you, and we're so excited at the opportunities we have today. I know time is of the essence for everybody, so if you'll permit me, I might be a little brief. We have a wonderful panel, and our aim is that you also interact with the heads of states, despite the fact that they have to be in 3 different places in the next half an hour. So I'm going to impose on the distinguished President of Uganda, President Museveni, if you would allow me, if you would like to say some remarks, talk to them about the opportunities, and then perhaps I might also encourage you to take some questions, if I may. So, please, welcome. The lectern will give you an opportunity to interact as well.
Mr. Chairperson of this forum, our Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, His Excellency the Vice President of South Sudan, ladies and gentlemen, I had not understood the topic well. I just heard that I was going to speak to people with a lot of money. I did not bother to understand what the topic was. I said that is very simple for me. But when I got here, I found that the topic was intra-African investment and regional economic integration. The few minutes I have, I would not like to spend so much time talking about the intra-African investment opportunities. This is because I don't know how much you know about Africa. Assuming that you don't know much about Africa, I therefore decided to try and help you see the potential for money in Africa. I know you are not philanthropists, you are not Mother Teresa's coming to do charity in Africa. You are coming to make money. And since I also don't come here very often, I thought I should use this time to encourage you to come to Africa, and we work together. You make money, and for us, we get investments. Now, what are the prerequisites? In fact, I wanted to restructure the topic to read something like stimuli for growth, investment, and enhancing profitability in Africa. I wanted to restructure it around those 3 points: growth, investment, and enhancing profitability. Because business people want profitability. They want the difference between the cost price and the selling price. Once you solve that, businesses will flock into the economy. Now, what are the stimuli for those 3 things to happen? Number 1, as I was telling the Chinese people who were with me in the other room, is market. Somebody cannot produce what he cannot sell. If people don't buy what you produce, you will not produce again. Africa is a huge continent. I was telling the Chinese that you can fit China, the United States, India, and Brazil into Africa, and you remain with spare space. This is because Africa is 11.7 million square miles of land, and your United States is 3 million square miles of land. So it's a huge continent. The population used to be small, and that's a topic for another day. I will not go into that for today. But it has now grown. The population is now 1 billion, and it will go to more than 2 billion in the next few decades. And the population is getting empowered. Therefore, their purchasing power is going up. Our first task, therefore, was to solve the problem created for us by colonialism, which was to balkanize Africa into 53, some of them small countries. Colonies for the British, colonies for the English, colonies for the English are the same as the British. The other one, the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish. Now we have been struggling to solve that. What have we done? We have used the regional economic integrations to solve that problem. We are aiming at the African common market for the whole continent, but we started with what we call building blocks. So we have the East African community, we have common market for Eastern and Southern Africa, we have got SADC, Southern Africa, we have got ECOWAS, West Africa, and we have got the one of Central Africa, Central African countries. But we are aiming at one common market. So there, you already have COMESA, for instance, 400 million people, stretching all the way from Egypt to, I think, Mozambique. I don't know whether Mozambique is a member, but certainly Zambia is. So that is stimulus number one for you. If you invest in Uganda, or Kenya, or Tanzania, or any of these, you are not only going to sell into the Ugandan market, but into the market of all these countries. And in the next few decades, into the whole continent, because we are trying to create a common market for the whole continent. So that is stimulus number one, which is already in place. Stimulus number two is to deal with infrastructure. Your chairperson was worried about infrastructure, but we are handling it. Electricity, the railways, the roads, the ICT, we are handling those elements of infrastructure. Uganda's economy, for instance, has been growing at a rate of 6.5% per annum for the last 20 years, in spite of the bottlenecks in infrastructure. Now that we have solved the problem of infrastructure, the economy will grow at a much higher rate. The third stimulus was correcting the mistake which our leaders made in the 1960s. Many people do not know why Asia went ahead of us, in spite of the fact that in the 1960s, many of the Asian countries were not very different from our countries in terms of growth. One of the main problems was our leaders made a mistake of attacking the private sector. They had some confusion. They thought that the private sector was taking out more money than it was bringing in. They thought it was causing a hemorrhage. So many of these leaders did what they called nationalization those days in the 1960s. I can see many of the people here are young, they may not have heard of those issues. But that was a big problem. That meant the state confiscating the assets of the private sector and making them state properties. In the case of Uganda, Idi Amin went further. He expelled the Indian businessmen who were part of our middle class. Physically, he got rid of them. Now, this was due to a misunderstanding that the private sector was taking out more money than it was bringing in, which was false. If you assume that a company is earning, let's say there is a textile factory with gross earnings of $100 million, even if it is owned 100% by foreigners, by the time the textile factory has paid for the cotton from the farmers, it has paid the workers their salaries, it has paid for electricity, because you cannot come with your own electricity. You must buy the local electricity. You cannot come with your own telephones. You must pay for the local telephones. Certainly you cannot bring your own water. You must pay for the water. And you pay taxes. Out of the $100 million, which the textile factory earned, maybe they will remain with 15%. Where would the 85% go? To us. Now, our leaders did not understand this. This was a big problem. Fortunately, I was lucky. I was a youth behind our leaders, and I was able to observe what was happening and to know where the mistakes were. And when we had opportunity, we changed that. And we said the private sector should take the lead. And many people in Africa have done the same. So that problem of persecuting the private sector, the private sector was persecuted in the 1960s and 1970s. That was one of the reasons why Africa lagged behind. Some people talk of Asia, but they forget that there are also countries in Asia which are still backward because of policy mistakes. If you take Burma, Burma is a very rich country in terms of natural resources. It is much richer than South Korea, for instance. South Korea has no resources. But Burma made policy mistakes. And because of that, Burma is still lagging behind other countries. Similarly, African countries made mistakes, policy mistakes, which we have corrected. So therefore, the third stimulus that is crucial for you to understand what is happening in Africa is the private sector. The private sector has now been emancipated. It can operate fully, and there will be no problem. The other stimulus for your business would be the human resource. If you have got market, you have got infrastructure, you have got the private sector is emancipated, the next thing you need are the human resource to help you operate your business. If they are not educated, you are in trouble. Fortunately, we have done very well on that. In the case of Uganda, the literacy rate is about 80%. Now, we are skilling them. In fact, our problem now is jobs for them. So that one is not a constraint at all. The other stimulus is macroeconomic stability. To make sure that you control inflation, you have got a sustainable debt policy, and so on and so forth. So these are in place. Therefore, whether you are from here or from within Africa, I can tell you that you can make profit when you invest in any of the African countries. There are some countries which have got problems like Somalia and so on, but the majority of the countries in Africa are stable, and many of them have policies like the ones I have mentioned here. Now, when it comes to Uganda, so once you have got these stimuli, then there are the other enabling factors that will help you to do good business. In the case of Uganda, you have got agro-processing. In Uganda, we are not going to invite you to come and grow crops for us. We have been doing that for the last 11,000 years. So we don't want anybody to come and grow crops. No, we grow them ourselves. We have been keeping cows for the last 7,000 years. So we don't need anybody to come and look after cows. You just come and process what we are already producing in agriculture. And if you take Uganda, there is nothing under heaven which is produced. One day I went to a place called Nebraska. Do you know Nebraska, you people? There was a friend of mine who invited me to a place called Omaha, Nebraska. Now, there was a group there called Conagra. These Conagra people, I wanted them to come to Uganda. And then one of them thought he was very clever and said, no, because they process potatoes, these potatoes which you call Irish potatoes. For us, we have got a better name. We call them Lumonde. Emonde. Now, this man said, Irish potatoes cannot grow 42 degrees, below 42 degrees north of the equator and south of the equator. I said, no, you are not well informed. Uganda, because of altitude, we have got conditions better than the ones of Nebraska. Although we are right on the equator, but because our altitude is high, we can grow better potatoes than you can grow here in Nebraska. So I helped the man to revise his geography. Now, everything can grow in Uganda. So therefore, what we need is for you to come and help us process sugar cane, bananas. We are the second biggest producers of bananas in the whole world. Coffee, cotton, all those things that you can think of, they grow in Uganda, the tropical products and the temperate ones. Then you have the minerals, phosphates, copper, cobalt, nickel. I don't know whether there's anybody from the Investment Authority here. They should be able to give you all this, or our office can give you all this information. Then we have the phosphates, iron ore, all that is available. You can come and invest. But before you talk about the minerals and the agro-processing, there is the infrastructure which I mentioned. There, you have got very big potential. You can invest in, for instance, electricity, in hydropower, in geothermal, in solar energy, in bioenergy. Any of those you can invest and you will make good money. Then there is tourism. When I am abroad, I get a lot of problems because of air conditioning. In Uganda, we don't have to condition the air. We don't have to cool it or warm it. We just enjoy it as it is. All the year round. All the year round. At one time, I thought I was very smart, and I maneuvered Uganda to be on the CNN. If you look on the CNN, when they are giving temperatures of the globe, Kampala is always there. And the temperatures never change. They are always 22 degrees, 28 degrees. So I thought that by the people watching those, they will come to Uganda in big numbers, but they have come, but not as many as I thought. But tourism is, one time I had a Pakistani general. He was based in Nairobi. He was like a military attaché. And he said that, he came and told me that in Pakistan, they have got what they call health spots, where you go to recuperate and so on. But he said the whole of Uganda was a health spot. Then you have got freshwater resources, freshwater fish. I don't eat fish myself, because in my tribe they don't eat fish. But I promote for others. 20% of Uganda is under fresh water. Lake Victoria, one of the biggest lakes in the world, is in Uganda. The River Nile is in Uganda. So the freshwater resources are available. Forest resources. Uganda is part of the equatorial forest. So all those opportunities are available. Then there is the financial sector. That's why we have got a problem. We don't have enough cheap money. The financial providers are still few. The banks are there, but the cost of money is still a bit high. So if you can come and invest in that sector, it will be very useful to us. Therefore, I have this write-up here. No, there is the petroleum industry. I've forgotten about the petroleum industry. We have discovered a little bit of petroleum and gas. People, of course, are very excited about petroleum. But for me, I regard petroleum as a temporary factor. It will not be there all the time. Agriculture and tourism are more durable than petroleum. But I don't mind taking advantage of petroleum money to build my economy. So in case you're interested in petroleum, you're excited by petroleum and gas, you are most welcome. I can go on and on. Once you give me audience, you do so at your own risk. But since I've got some other engagements, let me end here and inform you that what I'm saying about Uganda is also true of the neighboring countries. Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya, Tanzania, Congo. Congo still has got some problems of security, but once it settles down, it has got a lot of potential. South Sudan, the Vice President is here, he will speak for himself. So with these few words, I thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm glad I was able to make it in spite of the traffic problems. And I hope to see you in Uganda. Thank you very much. Do you want me to answer questions here?
Yes. In a minute, what I'll do is I'll have the AU chairperson speak. Okay. Mr. President, thank you so much for your very inspiring tour de horizon of Africa and how Africa can absorb many other countries in the process. Your remarks about stimulus is absolutely right on the mark, because under your leadership, you've done so many things in terms of economic and social integration for Uganda and for neighboring countries as well. As I mentioned earlier, time is of the essence because a number of the senior people have to depart shortly. So if you'll permit me that we'll have quick remarks, and we also want some questions to be taken, if at all possible. So I'd like to invite Dr. Zuma, who is the chairperson of the African Union Commission, the historic first for the international community for being a woman. She was the Minister of Health under Modiba, as we fondly remember him. She has served as Minister for Foreign Affairs for 2 presidents. And we are so thrilled to have you, Madam Zuma. I know it's busy time, but thank you. Warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much. And of course, Program Director and Excellency President Yoweri Museveni, His Excellency the Vice President of South Sudan, our friend here, the Ambassador Abdulaziz, honorable guests, captains of industry and financial institutions, ladies and gentlemen. I think my task has been made very easy because the President has spoken about most things that need to be spoken about, even though he was relating them mainly to Uganda, but quite a lot of them can be related to other parts of the continent. The evidence of Africa's progress over the past decade is irrefutable. The situation in Africa changed mainly during the periods 1995 to 2005 and beyond, as a result of political and economic reforms that led to greater peace, stability, and democratic governance, that tamed inflation, allowed for increased domestic investments from both public and private sectors, saw improvements in revenue collections, and improved trade prospects. These changes have provided a platform for the economic growth that a large number of African economies have experienced over the past decade. Africa also weathered the economic crisis, 2007-2008, with the adverse impact of the crisis through commodity pricing lasting less than a year for the continent. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, available data, therefore, positions Africa as a new growth pole for this century, where returns on investment is virtually in every sector is better than most parts of the world, whether it's in infrastructure, in ICT, retail, in health, in manufacturing. You can get higher than any part of the world, higher returns for your investments. A number of mega trends are also in Africa's favor as we speak. Africa's population is set to double in the next few decades. Its middle class is growing exponentially. It is rapidly urbanizing, and it has a very young, energetic, and creative population. And Africa, as the President has said, remains well endowed with mineral resources accounting for more than 5% of both production and reserves in oil and gas, as well as a number of other critical minerals. We know that you can't have a cell phone unless you visit the DRC and get some of the components there. So many of our reserves are of very high quality, and since Africa has less exploration than elsewhere, it still has a good prospect for discovery of additional resources, as we can see what is happening in Mozambique, in East Africa, and elsewhere. The ICT revolution in Africa showed that with technology, the continent can leapfrog several development stages, and that this is also possible in sectors such as agriculture, infrastructure, and energy. We know that Africa is now the second largest market for mobile phones, but we've also seen how young people in Kenya and elsewhere have been innovating bringing up very innovative programs through this technology. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there are but a few reasons why it makes business sense to invest in Africa and to do so for the long term. There are a number of specific areas we would like you to consider. Firstly, the African Union remains committed to accelerating continental integration with a view to significantly increase intra-African trade and tourism. Progress is being made towards the African Economic Community envisaged in the Abuja Treaty through various regional economic communities. I think the President has mentioned that. For example, the Economic Community in West Africa, ECOWAS, already introduced measures that allow free movement of people, goods, and services across the 15 member states. They've launched their free trade area and plan to launch the customs union by 2015. The COMESA SADC ECA tripartite agreement envisages a free trade zone from the Cape to Cairo, encompassing 26 countries, 526 million people, and more than $1 trillion in output. And of course, by 2017, we hope to be having a free trade area in Africa as a whole. Secondly, the integration initiatives should result in increased trade and building in the value chains across Africa. At the moment, as African countries and regions seek to industrialize, in many sectors, almost in all sectors, they still rely on imports of inputs from outside. Greater integration and regional infrastructure that connects countries and economies and people will make sourcing of these inputs from the continent considerably easier and cheaper. Investment in these regional value chains will therefore result in lucrative returns as domestic African markets and the middle class grows. Thirdly, Africa is still home to close to 60% of world's unused arable land. I won't say any more. I think the President said a lot about agriculture, except to say that we would like to empower women in this area. So I would like to just say we need to invest and assist women farmers in addition to everybody else to not only grow food, but also to process it. So the processing that the President is talking about should not only end up with men, it should end up with both men and women, young and old. And of course, there are still key impediments to growth, and the major one is infrastructure. Even though, as we speak, there are 800 active infrastructure projects across the continent. But of course, it's a big continent, 30 million square kilometers. But even with that, there are still huge backlogs in infrastructure, both roads, energy, ICT, and social infrastructure. At the same time, growth in Africa's infrastructure sector is expected to reach at least 9% over the next decade, 4 times faster than expected growth in the resource sector. The fifth issue is to ensure ethical corporate investment and social responsibility. I'm afraid to say, but I must say it, that disproportionately huge sums of money leave the continent illicitly. Over 60% through corporate tax evasion and under-reporting or undervaluing what is produced. This directly contributes to Africa's continued improvement. We must therefore work together to ensure that the private sector pays fair and transparent taxes in every sector in Africa, that it contributes to development of communities where they operate, and that it helps to implement sustainable environmental policies. Finally, none of the above will be possible without a skills revolution. Without investments in women and young people, Africa must train millions of young artisans, technicians, engineers, scientists in every single sector to enable the continent to industrialize, add value to its vast natural resources, develop its private sector, feed itself and the world, and construct and maintain its infrastructure. It is therefore a call I would like to make that business should not only invest in entrepreneurship and young startups, but also to work with the African governments and the African Union and other institutions to establish public-private sector partnerships for vocational, technical, scientific training that will provide the necessary skills, research and innovation in the industries. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we celebrate 50 years since the founding of the Organization of the African Unity, we look towards the future as Africans with confidence. And we invite all of you to accompany us on this exciting journey towards a prosperous Africa at peace with itself. Thank you.
Madam Zuma, thank you so much for your very inspiring remarks. One of the things you mentioned, finally, the 49% of the population is getting it right. The Secretary General appointed a woman from South Africa as the new executive director. So I think whether it's fair to say South Africans are taking over or Africans are taking over, both of them are good signs. Thank you. Can I invite two questions? President Museveni and Madam Zuma have to leave shortly, along with Ambassador Magid Abdulaziz for an urgent or pre-commitment at the United Nations. So, two questions and 30 seconds questions. So I have two already here. I'll start with you, sir. Please introduce yourself, quick question, and then I'll take both the questions and then we go from there.
Hi, I'm Bob Diamond. I'm formerly Chief Executive of Barclays, so I'm a big believer in the importance of banking to generate jobs and economic growth. I'm currently a founder of a merchant bank that's also investing in banking across Africa. I feel the Pan-African portion of banking, as opposed to the domestic country banking, is important to get businesses the money they need to invest. I'm passionate. But what I'd love to hear from you is, what is it that you want from the investment in banks? What are you looking for from banks to help drive the economy and to help drive jobs?
Thank you.
What I would want in Uganda is affordable money. Affordable money. My literary economics tells me that the crucial input in structuring the interest rates should be the rate of inflation. The rate of inflation in Uganda has been low for a long time. 3%, never more than 5%. However, you find bank interest rates are still high. So I think these banks are taking advantage of us. And they're making huge amounts of money. Now, if we could get banks which peg their interest rate near inflation, I don't want you to lose money. I don't want you to give an interest rate which is lower than the rate of inflation. But if the inflation rate is 3%, why do you go for an interest rate of 18%? Why? That means the difference is 15 points, 15 percentage points. What are you looking for? Are you not a thief or what? Now, if the inflation rate is 3%, why can't you give an interest rate of 9%? You would make a difference of 6%. And you would help us and also go to heaven.
Mr. President, this is a very important point. Bob, I'm very grateful for you being here. I know you're also doing Invest Africa. You're an Africa file. So I would like to just ask Madam Zuma to respond to that issue. And then I have two other speakers, so I don't know how we'll manage it. We'll juggle.
Okay. In addition to what the President has said, for infrastructure in particular, the African Development Bank and working with the AU is establishing an equity fund that would assist in the in infrastructure on the continent. And of course, that equity fund will then, once it's there, we will be able to sell bonds against it for infrastructure development. And so we need money into that equity fund for the ADB. And that equity fund, the ADB, is calling Africa 2050. And I think if we speak to the president or anyone of the ADB, they would be able to explain and to say how it's going to work. But we are really excited because we are going to be presenting to the heads of state a long framework, 2063, Africa 2063. And we want to present that framework together with a fund that can assist in moving some of those projects that we are putting forward. So I think that's one of the areas you can put money in. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the atmosphere has persuaded Madam Zuma to stay on a couple more minutes, if I may. Thank you for agreeing to do that. So I'd like to invite you, sir. Just introduce yourself. You don't need introduction like Bob. Doesn't need any introduction, but please.
I'm Ellis Rubenstein, President, CEO of the New York Academy of Sciences. And I thought it would be interesting to hear, particularly President Museveni, you made a remark about the catalysts that are needed in order to spur Uganda and the rest of Africa, and you mentioned among them human resources, but very just briefly. And then Madam Zuma made the point of the need to create a knowledge economy or technical skills and higher education as well. And I guess what I wanted to know was whether you would be interested in Uganda in the notion of utilizing the ICT sector and the ability to do social networking in order to inspire the children in Uganda to be scientists and engineers in larger numbers. This is something that many of your colleagues in other countries think is crucial for the next decades, but I didn't hear you touch on it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are biasing our education to science courses. We give incentives, scholarships. Government scholarships are structured in such a way that 70% of it goes to science courses. And of course, we encourage the ICT. We have built the backbone, the ICT backbone to cover most of the country. We are very much aware of that. And many of our scientists are actually here in the United States. That's part of the problem. We educate them, they emigrate because they are not getting enough jobs in Uganda. One of the children who is sending your satellites in space is one of our children. So we are helping you. We are sending, we are giving you technical assistance. But to conclude, I just forgot one point, because I have taken too much time from the Vice President.
No, it's okay.
I talked about the market of Africa. When you invest in Africa, you should not only, you not only target the market of Africa, the one I talked about. We have negotiated with our partners, like the United States. They have given us access to their market, quota-free, tax-free, tariff-free, for 6,500 products. And here I want to salute President Clinton, President Bush, and President Obama. That opening of your market to our products was one of the biggest altruistic actions I have seen, and I salute the President. So we have got, so therefore, when you invest in Uganda, you are not only selling to the market of Africa, you are also selling to your own market here, back home, at very good, on very good terms. And then also China, they have given us all products, more or less, quota-free, tax-free. Initially, they had given us for 440 products. The same with India, the same with the European Union. The European Union gave us everything but arms. We can export everything we produce to Europe at no tariff and no quota limitation except weapons. And since we are not in the weapons business, that was academic. So I thought I should mention that also. I thank you very much. Allow me to go, please, so that the Vice President speaks. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Thank you. So I would like to propose, and I'm very grateful for Madam Zuma for having agreed to take one or two questions. I'm going to request, I have one speaker. So we agreed 2 questions. The third speaker, or fourth, whoever wants to say anything, I'm going to be looking for commitments. I'm going to be looking for somebody to say, I am going to invest $10 million in Africa. Or maybe 50, I'm sorry, I got the number wrong. I would also like to then, before our distinguished guests leave, I'd like to invite Ambassador Magid Abdulaziz to explain the UN overall architecture which supports the mission of Africa. So, sir, please introduce yourself and welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Mike.
Perhaps I can help you bring $50 million to Africa.
Bless you.
My name is Jeff Lippman, and I want to address the question of tourism that was raised both by President Museveni and by you, Madam Chairperson. We have this week launched, with a company called Gate Global Impact, a new investment platform with the UN Global Compact and supported by Africa Investor to bring impact investments into Africa down to the base of the pyramid in the communities. Because for tourism, you can get it to go to the big cities, but the challenge is how do you get it then to go into the communities and to make the changes on women's rights, on education, on everything else. And my question to you, Madam Chairperson, this new platform is launched with the Global Compact. Can we have your support to help us engineer it through the complex regulatory system that will be needed to bring impact investment down to the grassroots in Africa, because you can bring much more than 50 million if we do it properly. Thank you.
Thank you. That is very helpful. May I invite one more question? This way we'll expedite the responses. One more question. Anybody? Somebody's adjusting the hair, actually. Maybe that's the guy who I should ask the question. Barbara, please.
Yeah. The potential is so real and compelling, but I think I want to follow up on some of the offers here. If we put more attention on the factory, the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa, the African Union was at the meeting, Italy was president of the G8 in 2009. And then we talked about infrastructure then. In fact, out of that, we just did a report for the African Development Bank in Irma on what are the risk needs of Africa and the solutions to really get the capital to work for us. Whether it be the issue that the president talked about, banks that have too high interest rates, or whether it be investors that are sitting in this room. So I think we need to have much more attention on the actual factory, building the technical capacities of everyone to really do this. So there are some very practical ideas we've been discussing, in fact, as part of the UN financing for development process since 2001. You know, one is using ICT to have a platform, and maybe this is a bit like the Global Compact one, so we can use the power of the technology to bring together the enabling information, the investors with the actual projects. I think we need to go beyond the meetings and really work more on these very technical ways. And so the Global Clearinghouse is available and wanting to work with partners, but we need you with the political power to ground and anchor these initiatives in the ground so they actually pay off. Enough
Thank you.
words, action. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Indeed, we had discussed this issue last year, and I'm so pleased you raised it. And I'm going to ask Hubert to follow this up after these discussions, actually. So, Madam Zuma, may I invite you to respond to the very good question about tourism, and then maybe the Undersecretary General, Mr. Maged Abdulaziz, will sum up for us. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Tourism, it's a very good idea, and it's very important because it has a lot of multiplier effects in terms of jobs and getting revenue to people. You've asked if we can work with you, and the question is, the answer is a very big yes. But we're not only going to work with you as the AU, we're going to bring the regional economic communities to work with, because we've set up teams to work with them. So we're going to bring them with us so that we can work together and hammer out how it can we can work to make what you are saying materialize in terms of getting things down to the people in the villages on the ground. So yes, I'll ask our people to give you our contacts, and we can then meet with the regional economic communities and start working together.
Thank you. So one of the things, Hubert, we need to do is to have a follow-up mechanism so that people who have ideas, interests, etc., have a way to interface with all the countries in Africa. And I might lean and be presumptive and request Undersecretary General Maged Abdulaziz to see if we might also use your good offices, sir.
Well, yeah, I will definitely. We can support any kind of mechanism that you would like to establish, and to follow up with the Office of the African Union here at the office of the distinguished head of the Commission, and we can start discussions on these important issues. You asked me to speak
Please.
about what the United Nations is doing in support of the African Union. This session of the General Assembly, which started today, is centered around the last push for the implementation of the Millennium Development Goals. And we have 2 more years to go till 2015, and unfortunately many of the African countries are not on track to achieving the MDGs, and that's why there is a strong push in the United Nations to implement what remains of commitments from the MDGs. Also, there is another preparatory process that have started for what would the economic and architecture going to look like after 2015, after the MDGs are over, and within the implementation of the Rio Plus 20, the SDGs, the means of implementation, the financial side of it, the transfer of technology. All these issues are occupying a lot of attention from the United Nations in support of the African Union and the African Development Bank, and with the continued cooperation with the ECA, Economic Commission on Africa, which are all the 3 of them are on the ground, and we are here at the headquarters level giving our support for those important issues. Also, the United Nations is now turning from concentrating more on the peace and security in Africa to concentrate more on development. And Madam Zuma have been pressing very much with the Secretary General on this issue. And that is why this nexus between peace and security and development is coming into surface. The last visit by the Secretary General of the United Nations and the President of the World Bank to the Great Lakes region, and the commitment of the World Bank for spending $1 billion to help economies revive and thus help peace and security stabilize. So this is getting into the start of the implementation, and we at the United Nations are following up in consultation and close cooperation with the African Union, and there will be also soon another visit, I understand, to the Sahel region in this regard. Also, our activities with the African Union and the regional economic communities go to many other activities, but I don't want to abuse the time of the distinguished Vice President, and I will stop here, and maybe in another setting we can speak more about the issue.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. This is very helpful. And by the way, if you want to contact the office, the number I'm hoping will be 1-800-UN for Africa. Would that be a good number to have?
It could be arranged also.
It could be arranged. I'm so grateful to Madam Zuma and Under Secretary General Abdulaziz for being here with us. We will have a one-to-one session with the Vice President of South Sudan. So you will be able to have bilateral, all kinds of things. We want people to sign up for South Sudan. Thank you for joining us, and please permit Madam Zuma and Under Secretary General Abdulaziz to leave. Thank you.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.